So, how long ago? I don't know. When was the last time? Let me check. Two weeks ago? Fix import export of identically named fields is a PR we merged. The issue was that if you have two different parts, but these parts use the same field name, then the export would merge those fields, because the field names in the export file is not prefixed by the part name. So this PR fixes it. It's on one tag next, but what it's doing is that only if you generate a new export file, it will use this new prefix. If you import an existing one, it will work as previously. So it should not break any existing export file or recipe as long as there is no conflict, or it was broken and it will still be broken. But now when you export a field, there will be a part name prefix in the field name. Now this is on dev branch. Dropping static view compilation temporary to be able to support dynamic compilation with Roslyn. So OpenIddict has been working on dynamic compilation with the new language version and updated all the project files. And you also check that nothing from the gallery was broken. TypeScript tool version property, okay. DotNetCompilerPlatform DLL. Okay, so specific version defined in the web config. When there is a web config change, we need to check that the CodeGeneration has been updated too, and I don't see it here. CodeGeneration. So someone like Janos will tell Benedek to ensure that we also generate the correct web config file with the CodeGen templates, which is done in the commit after. Okay, so that's good. So someone won't do it. Good. And then the CodeGeneration fixing as a salesperson pledge. Okay. Merge into dev branch. That's good. Also, in the dev branch, fixed this. Okay. The projects which are defining the language version, now they don't need it anymore. So that's good. Fixing build warning. That's okay. Fixing. Okay. So that's good. That's preparing for release. So that's good. Okay. Stabilization. So that's good. Orchard questions? Good. Orchard 2 core. Orchard core. Fetching. Days. Versionable has been merged, so this is where we talked about it, I think 2 weeks ago. This was to support content items which can be versioned or not. By default they are versioned, but you can say I don't want to version these items, meaning you won't store the history of all the changes. It will just store the published and draft if there is any. Nick on Json API / GraphQL. Sipke on workflow, but these will be the two demos. This branch has been merged, so I will just clean it. This is to support everything as embedded resources, no more packages folder. This is Chris working on a specific state of the flow part, that when there is no item in the flow, you can customize the HTML that is rendered, if you want to include or not a section for that. Jean-Thierry fixing the URL and resize filters, so you can ignore the name of the argument. When you do resize URL, you can just pass 2 arguments, the sizes, and it will use them as width and height if you don't give the name. And this is to fix an issue when you resize a URL which contains an encoded HTML char like %20. This has been merged. Yes, here. No, this has been merged later, but not now. Later. Incremental work on workflow serialization. This is Sipke. Jean-Thierry fixing some bugs with removing an unnecessary service that we were using. The MIME type resolver and NuGet package. Yes, he's removed the package also. Yes, because there is already a service in ASP.NET called IContentHandler. When I introduced this package, I knew there was one, but I couldn't find it. So he found it, so he removed it. But I found an issue to remove it. Incremental work on activity editing. This is Sipke. Fix building, because if build is broken, we need to fix it. Make the sample projects work. So fixing the samples. Yes, it's a long time issue that if you are using the modularity without the CMS, you might face an issue that it's requiring that what's the name of this service? AppInsight will require a JavaScript encoder that is introduced by MVC automatically. But if you create a module without MVC, you will not have the service that AppInsight requires. So by just calling add web encoders, now you have it even if you don't use MVC. So that will fix the samples. Disconnection warning in content preview. So we merge this PR. So when you preview your content item and you edit the preview, if you go on another content item, the preview will display a banner saying that you can close this window because it's disconnected from the content item, and it won't reflect the changes. Some fixes to the embedded branch. Sipke, 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 Nick, Sipke, 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 Sipke. We should do more Christmas and New Year holidays. Jean-Thierry fixing some targets, but I don't remember having merged this thing, so maybe, or maybe Nick merged lots of things, so maybe they have been merged. Jean-Thierry. Kevin started to work on a refactoring of OpenIddict module by extracting the YesSQL serialization or the YesSQL stores for OpenIddict and also users, meaning when you store rows, users, and tokens, now it's done by a module which is implemented by either YesSQL or Entity Framework, and then you can choose which serialization you want to use. The goal being that you can use Orchard to be your token store and authentication manager and roles management through the admin, and not using YesSQL if you just want to use Entity Framework. Okay, so you can use a tenant just to manage, just as a authentication manager and also tokens manager, using just Entity Framework and not YesSQL if you don't want it. So he made the refactoring to do that. Sipke has a PR open, I assume, that transforms every handler into async handlers. There was an open issue for that.
Yeah, so you had a comment about or a suggestion to remove all of the non-async versions, but I had a question about that.
I saw your answer. I don't want to answer it. It's a bad comment. You can make everything async. We don't need the non-async one, because the difference with that, if you had to implement it, because actually all our code is async in this path. So everything that is calling async is from the content manager, right? The content manager, all its methods are async, like load, async.
No, I get that. I was more thinking about the convenience of the implementer. If you don't have any code that's async, then you always have to return a completed task.
And that's fine.
Okay.
And that's okay. That's convenient. So I don't want to have to support to double number of methods we have in the handler just to prevent people from returning a task if they are not async themselves. And I assume they will be async. So let's in this case let's make just things async. So this is convenience. Convenience is not a good argument. A good argument will be if there can be a non-async call, and that we actually have a path which is not async, and we don't have a path which is not async. So
shouldn't that be invoke async?
Yes, and that's the other comment I put on his PR, and he will take it into account. He said so. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, cool.
Because
I fixed that because you're right. Okay. I have to await.
Here it's fire and forget. If you don't await, you trigger, but you're not waiting for it to be done, so there will be issues.
Then the order, you don't control the order anymore. But I fixed that already. So the only thing left to do for me is to remove the non-async version to make everything async. All right.
This is breaking, but that's an easy break. That's not people. We just have to change our modules, and mostly our modules. That would be easy.
Exactly. Yep. All right.
Good. Thank you. Merge dev into workflow because workflow missing private assets attributes. Okay, good. Yeah, something we need to ensure people when they add modules don't forget this thing. Prevent duplicate resource names. So this is the embedded branch. So dev branch now is here. Fixes race conditions. So these were PRs that were merged by Nick. Origin target framework. Change the target entry point not to have the pre-create intermediate output path directory. We'll trust him on that. Incorrect localizer types. Simplified activity display. This is zipke. TypeInfo remove deprecated GetTypeInfo. There was an issue for that file because we don't have to use that now anymore since netstandard 2. This is zipke.
Oh, hang on a second. Yeah, zipke. Should it be dot invocation? Oh, you've done it. Okay, you made it.
Is it that after? You see, await dot invocation.
Okay,
and
cool. But I saw an invoke still in there. But, okay.
Yeah, here.
Oh. Yeah, I missed that one. Probably more. I'll fix that. Thanks for catching.
We have PRs for that. Improves workflow, blah, blah, blah. Chris is back. What is he doing? Fixes invalid cast bug when using results. Oh, yes, because we can return documents or JSON object, a JObject. It's very bad API, you will say. I would agree. If we can fix that, maybe we should return a single result which can be has documents or has JObject and tell us what it is or do something, I don't know. But at the same time, I think this API returns an object like you can return whatever you want and the view knows what to do with it. So I'm not sure. And workflow and JSON API. Okay, who wants to start first? Zipke, I'm sure he's ready.
I'm ready.
I don't mind. Go for it, Zipke.
All right. So this is about the workflow stuff that I've been working on and to show you guys some progress and gather some feedback.
Well, I don't know if it works, but at least it's beautiful.
Yeah, it looks pretty nice, huh? Can you see my screen?
Yes, everyone can see.
All right. So there's the feature called workflows here. And by the way, everything, it's so fast. It just amazes me every time I work with this new Orchard. It's pretty cool.
No, it's just that the old one is so slow that anything seems fast when you start.
Yeah, I guess it's all relative. All right, so last time I demoed, you saw the activity toolbox to the right. I removed that and now made it consistent with the other UIs where you can browse for things, in this case activities. And these are the default set of activities for now, though it will be extended with more. If you enable the contents feature, then you will see content-related activities and events. I'll just go ahead and show a couple of them.
Sorry, what did you say about activities and events? If we do what?
If you enable
more of them.
Yeah. If you enable contents, the contents feature, that module also exposes a set of content. What do you mean, why?
If we enable the contents feature, you mean you don't have contents here? Oh, I
no,
see.
contents is not enabled. This is the software as a service.
You use the require feature attribute?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, which is perfect for this. Yeah, that was great for this thing. Actually, I'll show you.
And everyone is already commenting that we need a tab here.
Yeah, I have a bunch of notes here.
No, we need at least tasks and events, so you can filter tasks.
Yeah, but we also have categories. So I was thinking we should have things like content, HTTP, primitives, etc.
Okay, so we need more than that. Okay, we need to think about it.
Definitely. Yeah, because it's becoming unwieldy already. But let me show you how unwieldy it can really get if I enable this one. Yeah, there's a little bug here where it doesn't display the created thing. I broke it yesterday. But I'll create a new one. So now we see many more activities such as content-related events, content version, also content-related activity tasks such as delete content and publish content somewhere here.
Your screen is lagging.
Okay, I'll go slow. And one thing that I'm experimenting with, and that's I'm prototyping it, is the ability to not only handle content-related events, but any event, of course, that's provided by the system in any module, but also to behave similar to other routes. So you can basically handle HTTP requests using a workflow, which I think is pretty cool. I'll show you that. So there's an event here called incoming HTTP request. Mm-hmm. This is I'm also each activity is an entity, so it has drivers. So there's three display types. One is design. That's what you'll see in a second once I finish this one. This is the edit display type. And then there's the thumbnail display type, which we just saw when we looked at the activity picker. And that works pretty well. I like that there's no more the Forms API to deal with it. This is more flexible. In any case, there's I'm not sure I'm going to keep this mode here, but this lets you control whether you want to behave this to intercept HTTP requests as if it's as an action filter, which means you can do something with the request, but you don't control the output of the request per se, and it's definitely not going to register a route. So that's the action filter. But if you select route, then what happens here, you can put in any path you like, and this workflow will then start handling this path. For example, my workflow handler, and it's save. So here we see the activity, the workflow designer. So now if I add another one, for example, a decision, which I'm considering renaming this to just script, because you can really do much more than just making a decision. You can just invoke scripts, but that's up for the debate. And we need to make this the start activity, of course. And now if we save this, and then we go to the front, let's say my workflow handler. It failed. Why? I don't know why it failed. It worked when I tested it.
That's why that the decision task will create a view. I will have add a task which is return some HTML, and then have, I don't know, a way to define what HTML. A decision. That's weird. Because
well, yeah. So this decision it's a scripted thing, and it allows you to define the outcomes.
Also, is this intercept HTTP request blocking, or well, not? Let's say that I intercept /admin. Do you redirect admin?
Well, if you want to intercept, then you'll have to use the action filter, and that way you can only specify existing URLs. But if you change it to a route, then it will behave similar to other routes, where it uses the virtual path in a custom route, and then it will look for if paths are being requested using this path. If so, then it will rewrite it, or well, it will then invoke a controller. So it's similar to mapping contents to their paths, to their aliases. And this is then, instead of the content controller, this will use some workflow controller, and then it will. And this, of course, I wouldn't recommend using decision activities to render HTML like this. I would, if anything, it should maybe do a redirect to some existing page, or maybe even leverage a view engine. But it can be as fancy or as simple as you like, obviously. But this is just a proof of concept.
Good.
Primarily for this first activity to have the ability to implement business logic and associate it with a URL, similar to logic apps in Azure, I guess. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but we have control flows. For example, we can evaluate an expression. And expressions are it uses the script manager, so you can say do things like, if I added a bunch of method providers and input. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell about that. So there's a bunch of features that I implemented. Many of them are, of course, inherited or copied from Orchard 1. But what's different with this new workflows module is that you can provide, instead of as an input provide a content object, you can provide multiple kinds of objects, and I call them inputs. So these are like in arguments for method calls. You can set variables, so activities can set variables, and that's
in a workflow instance, you can set a variable. Okay.
Exactly. Yes, and these are local variables if you compare it to a method. And then there's outputs, which are the return values. So when you invoke a workflow instance, when you invoke a workflow, then it will create an instance, and that instance executes and can set zero or more outputs, which you can then inspect and do something useful with if you're programmatically invoking a workflow. And there will be an activity that will execute another workflow, so you will have a workflow activity to invoke another workflow which can return outputs, which you can then use from the calling workflow if you like. But that activity doesn't exist yet, but this will add support for that. Long-running support, of course, so you can start a workflow and it can halt on some event, and then you can continue the workflow. And using the inputs, you can provide additional stimuli. Plus, what I think is a nice feature is in Orchard 1, you would use the content ID to correlate or to resume an existing workflow, and it would be associated with a particular content ID. But in this new workflow module, you don't have to deal with content at all. It can be anything you like. The content handlers, they will use the content ID as the correlation ID, but any custom module can use anything else. So you don't have to be bound to just one content ID. It could be something application specific or a combination of values.
So is it just like variables in our for instance? Should we have the same, or is it a different set of variables that have a specific?
Yeah, so it's
like they should not be mutable, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's one identifier. It's just an identifier that you provide. So in Orchard 1, you would specify the content, and then it would store in the database. It would store the content ID, which would be associated with the workflow instance.
Yeah.
So that's this thing.
Okay.
It's just a string, but it's interesting. We could, of course, because with YesSQL, we could take the inputs and associate each workflow instance with each individual input variable as well, and then.
Yeah, I was just thinking like the instance object, because it has a set of variables. Maybe just use variables and then the content. Then you can set content item ID : and a value for content item ID, or see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you could just use variables, because now you have variables. So I mean.
Yeah, that's definitely an option. I'll give that some more thought.
Call it property and not variables, and then that's a property of your workflow instance, and then you can put the content item ID as a property of the workflow if it relates to a content item. And if there are many, you can have content item IDs and then have many content item IDs. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently you would have to do a comma-separated string of IDs, but with this you don't have. You can just use the whatever object you specify. Okay. And to be clear, you use the inputs. It's stored in the inputs part of the workflow context. So when you invoke a workflow, you get two arguments. One is the workflow definition ID, and the second one is a dictionary of inputs, so of objects, and that's stored in the inputs here. Okay. So I separated those. Yeah,
that's good to separate outputs, properties, and inputs. That's good.
Yeah. All right. So, and then of course there's support for scripts, which that's really nice to have the script support. It's easier to use, I think, than tokens. Also easier to implement global method providers. One issue that I ran into, which I need to fix, is that as soon as you add a method provider, but that one that is actually specific to the current workflow instance, you also have to, after you're done executing the workflow instance, you need to remove it from the global method providers list again. Otherwise, it will keep adding it. And I saw that you did something similar in the recipes module, where you add a global method provider that is specific to that recipe execution. But I didn't look to see if you removed it afterwards. But in my case, I need to do it because I have certain methods that are specific to the current workflow context, so I also need to remove it after. Which made me think maybe it's an idea to
bug. Maybe we need a transient engine, and then if you have a transient engine, it will clear everything every time.
Exactly. That sounds useful for this scenario at least. So that's cool. So a new one is loops, and there's two kinds of loops currently. So we have a for loop, and a while loop. So here's a for loop, and here you can just specify an expression that evaluates to a number. So that will be the number of loops. And then there's the while loop, which can evaluate a condition that evaluates to true or false. And the way that works is very simple. For example, currently, by the way, you have to provide a prefix, but my intention is to allow you to specify something as a literal, like in this case, and then it won't use the script manager. It will just parse this to the expected value using the specified type as implemented by the activity.
What does the widget filter do? The layers.
What?
The layers. What do we do in the layers?
What do we do in which layers?
The layers module. We have that. What do we do for that? Do we type JS colon or? No, that's the answer is that. Do whatever the layers do.
All right. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I didn't know about that, so I'll have a look.
Because probably it's just forcing for JavaScript for security reasons.
What do you mean for security reasons?
So that you can't type anything else than JavaScript. I don't know. We'll look at layers. Because you could add C# here, but again, if you allow C# in the editor, then.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, there's it needs to be sandbox, and the global method providers could be a means to, if you're careful to not expose .NET objects, because that's what I'm currently doing.
If you expose C#, then you can format the hard disk. Boom. Yeah. So that's why in the admin we should not allow C#.
Okay. Yeah. But what about JavaScript then? Well, that's the same because.
So look at layers. What layers is doing, because layers fixed this issue.
Okay. Do you don't want to allow script at all, like JavaScript?
Yes, I want to allow JavaScript. But there might be another script that you want to allow. But the question is, what did layers do? And if it's, but in the case when it's called condition, you can say it's JavaScript then.
No, that's true. So, but at the same time, I do want to use the script manager to evaluate the expression to not reinvent the wheel.
Sure, it will be in the script manager for sure. Look
but
at
how
what
do you
layers
then? Yeah, okay, because there you don't have to provide the prefix. All right. So this for loop has a done and a iterate branch, and the iterate branch, that's where you attach all of the activities that you want to iterate over, and then a thing that makes it very easy is to with activities. So there's a result, or I call it a stack currently, which is not a good name. It's a terrible name. But what each activity can do, they can push return value to the stack, and then any subsequent activity can just use the result method to retrieve that value. So you don't have to assign a variable to the workflow context, which you then have to access from the other activity. It's just there on the stack, and then so in this case, the for loop activity pushes the current index to the stack, and then the activities in the attached to the iterate branch can then, I'll show you, it's easier.
And there is only one value on the stack?
Well, no, it pushes and it will be popped whenever.
Really a stack, okay.
Yeah, it's a real stack, but I'm not sure it's a good mechanism. I have to think about it some more. But for now, it works. It's very useful, at least, to have the ability to easily access the return value from the previous activity, similar to calling a function and then being able to retrieve its return value. So, for example, we could have a notify activity, and this would be. This is also. I'm not sure actually if this is an expression, but you would use it as such. Result. That's still the only thing you have to do, and this will, because it will be attached to the for loop. The for loop will return the current index. So you can say. Like so. And this is just JavaScript, of course. And as you notice, the designer, it's not large, but it will increase in size as you move down activities. So that way you're not restricted, which I think currently is in Orchard 1 is a little bit problematic sometimes. So this is the wrong branch, of course. It needs to be like this. And this needs to ultimately go back to the for loop, because I didn't invent a specific, specialized for construct or some specialized design. This was the easiest way to to work with to implement a for loop, which I think is nice, good enough. So there's that. Well, you see evaluation, so that's just scripting. Here's an activity that can set the output, so that would be basically the return values of the workflow itself when you invoke it. And you can set variables, which will rename to property. And that is local to the current workflow instance, so you can set it, and then other activities can access it. And so forth. You can do many things. Everything. These are all little statements, if you will. And this way you can create, well, pretty advanced business logic, I think. So that's the current status.
Cool.
So yeah, there's many more activities to do. So I started. Well, we have a branch activity now. You can just say branch 1, 2, 3, for example. But I don't have the merge branch yet, so that needs to be implemented. As we discussed, we need to improve the.
We should make the editor better instead of having a comma-separated list of values. Just use some more Ajaxy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you can just add it to a list. Yeah.
Add branch and add plus minus, and then.
Yeah, exactly.
And probably with the technical name and the display name, so we can change the display name without breaking existing.
Yeah. So currently, there's a activities return outcome. So instead of a localized string, it actually returns an outcome which has a localized string property. But it makes an explicit distinction between display name and technical name. And that will be good to have here, where you can specify technical names and display names. Yeah, so we need that. Well, we need many more activities, as I mentioned. And there's one issue. I appear to have introduced some database connection leak somewhere, because whenever with this workflow module or feature enabled, now when I change a content item, let me create a quick one. I get it appears as if there's it's resolving the session from the wrong service provider or from some weird scope, or maybe it's holding on to something, but that I am looking into. But that should be resolved soon.
But at the same time, you don't call async correctly, so maybe.
Well, I made sure that it wasn't because of that. This started happening even before before that. So that's not the issue. But I'll figure that out. But other than that, it's in a pretty good shape because the basics work. We have workflows that can be executed. Unfortunately, I couldn't show you because this demo didn't work. But that will work, and we have long-running workflows, and
debugger. You need to add to the list debugger? So like in Orchard 1, you can list the existing instances, running instances.
Yes,
and when
exactly.
you edit them, you see what state it is, and you can see the variables and things like this. That should be pretty easy because it was easy to do in Orchard 1. It's the same editor, it's just a debug mode, so display more things on the editor.
Yeah, so that still needs to go in. After that, it's ready to be used.
That's good.
I think it will already be useful. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to do a quick demo of some of the JSON API work I've done. So this is GraphQL. It's not what we're going to look at today. Okay, cool. So I've introduced some API endpoints. At the moment, so if we look at our current Orchard screen, I've got a blog. I've got 2 blog posts, a test and the default one, which is a man must explore. So first thing we can do is we can now browse to those via our API. That's the wrong content item ID. Content item ID looks like that. There we go. So we have the JSON API version at the top. We have some links. So links to the self, which is should always be the link that the URL at the top. We have a link to the version. So if I've got multiple versions, I know where I can go on that version, and it starts content items version. So if I pop that in, you'll be able to see. Should just work. So it's going to be exactly the same, but this is the version. It looks like self isn't correct, but I'm having some issues with the links. Also, you can go to the type. So if I go to the type, I can see all content items of type blog. So if I did that, you'll be able to see all content items of type blog. And if I go back again, so this is the one that we're looking at, you can see that I've also got my data of type blog. So that's the blog that I'm viewing. The blog has got some stuff attached to it, such as auto route parts, a body part, and a title part. And it's also got some relationships. So you can see here that my relationships is I've got a blog post and the link to view all those blog posts for this content item. So you can see right there, that's the content item ID. I've got a list of the blog posts with the IDs associated to them. So if I go like that, you can see, so self is wrong. I've got a note down about that already. But you can see that I've got a list of the blog posts that are associated to that particular blog. And you can also see, it doesn't look like I've got body part on these, but maybe I haven't added that in yet. But you can see I've got a related back to the parent. So I think I need relationship in here properly. So I'm not too sure about these links. I think they might be wrong. What's kind of cool though is, let's have a blog post. If we take this blog post, for example, we're just going to view it up front rather than in a list. So I can see I've got my blog post. I can go to the latest version of the blog post. So if my latest version is different, you can go and view that version. Same with the published version. But at the moment, it looks like the versions are the same.
It's risky.
Why is it risky?
I would assume these APIs should just show the published items and not talk about drafts.
Yeah, maybe.
Or maybe, and then you will have
a permission based.
Yeah, no, maybe you have a specific API for drafts, like we have a /preview in the content item controller.
Well, what's the point? I mean,
to not show that there is an upcoming blog post with a specific title or I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we should just remove latest and published. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. And then there is a specific API for previews, and itself is the preview. I mean, I don't know.
Maybe. Or as Sipka said, maybe it could be permission based.
Yeah, but then you have a permission every time you. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. But I mean, it works. It's quite nice to navigate around. There's some issues with the links. I kind of forgotten where I got to. Yeah, it was quite nice. Only other thing I worked on was the GraphQL UI. I moved the assets to be based inside of to be based inside of here. So I've now got React and React DOM in here with the rest of the GraphQL stuff. Anything else? No. Okay, cool. So I'm going to just jump back to the JSON API and just show you how it technically works. So JSON API works off of a result manager. What you do is you implement something called a JSON API resource handler. If I go to the implementation and look at something like a body part. So, for example, here I have a JSON API resource handler for a content item. And I'm saying, does this content item have a body part associated to it? If it does, then attach a property to do with body part. And that's how I've handled. So you could throw anything at it. So if it was like JObject or I don't know, foobar or whatever, then you can customize it based on your property. In this instance, I've just customized it based on content item, which makes sense for Orchard, but it does allow the extension there for it. Another one. What's
the purpose of the API property? Instead of returning the JSON,
that's
the object model of the JSON API.
Yeah, that's a library. That's not something I've invented. So that's just,
and this concept is important. I was asking myself why we need that. I'm like, we need that. I even asked Nick to do that. The issue is that the raw data in JSON in the database might not be something you want to expose directly in API. The best example is for media, and Chris will agree. In the database, we have /foo.jpg, but when we expose it on an API, we need to resolve it. And we can't ask the user to send another request to say, hey, can you resolve /foo/bar.jpg to the public API? So when we expose the content item, if we find a media, we need to replace the URLs with public URLs. So we need to manipulate the data before sending it to the user.
That makes sense. So you need to create the data that you actually want to return, but why do you have to use the API property instead of returning an object or a JObject?
Because the library that Nick is using to create the JSON result, the JSON API result, requires this kind of object, because there might be more metadata than just the one you have in a JObject.
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah, exactly. API property is something very specific to that library. It's something that I have invented or anything like that. What it does under the hood, it probably has other stuff that happens in Create that, I don't even know about. If you see what I mean, like it's not something that I would have just created.
Probably they are independent from JSON.NET. That's it. So it doesn't know about JObject. It creates its own object that is API object.
I think API property inherits from JObject, if I saw that correctly.
Okay.
But still, that point is valid because there's additional methods on it.
That's the thing. No, it's a JSON object. It's not JObject. So you see.
All right.
So it's like it's something very specific. Like I said, they do a lot of stuff that I don't really know, but yeah.
They have their own thing. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. So we need a SPA application that uses it.
Yeah, this is pretty cool.
Next step, Nick, is to plug it in the YAM static site generator.
Yeah, maybe.
As an example of how you can use the API to generate your site from Orchard directly. So you just manage your content from Orchard, and then you create sites using the APIs that you have. YAM, W-Y-A-M. It's a .NET static site generator that uses Razor as views, and and I pointed you to an article from the guy 2 weeks ago when you talked about Netlify, and he made a client API for Netlify, like you did actually for your GraphQL thing. the client API. So that's why I sent you the link. So
yeah, so that client's interesting, but it doesn't really represent the way Orchard deals with
it. Was just to show you that some other people create clients for server-side APIs, like you did. Just for that. And then you should make a YAM driver to generate static sites. That would be awesome.
Okay. Cool. Yep, written it down.
And then we have a workflow activity to automatically generate the static site when the content has changed. Done.
Yeah.
And Chris will do a specific deployment step to deploy the statically generated site from the server side to a host like Netlify or Azure Web Apps. So we can not only edit the content, generate the static site, but also deploy the site, everything from Orchard.
So one interesting thing that I did do, so I'm also using the required attribute, which is quite cool, is I'm actually using an output filter for this stuff. So the controllers don't know anything about Json API. It happens in here, in Json API output formatter. So I'm using, it's kind of, I think there's a JSON output formatter, but I've got my own for Json API, where you just specify your supported media types. And then I'm using that to drive whether I'm returning JSON API or not. Yeah, in a JSON API format, which is quite nice, actually. It's quite cool. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Questions? Oh, yeah, you wanted to. So Antoine deployed the documentation on Azure website. Do you have the URL, Antoine? I'm sure you have. It's .azure websites. Oh, you have a link directly. So I will just click on it. Orchard doc.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
You want to share your screen, Sebastian?
Yes, I can share.
That looks nice, Antoine.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah,
that's much better than what we have now in terms of aesthetics.
So he had made it using a custom website, but now the new step that he managed to accomplish is that he created a custom deploy.cmd file that works with Azure websites, so that Azure websites will detect when a GitHub repository has changed, our GitHub repository, and then just run this script from Azure website to generate the documentation as a static site using the custom, the specific, what's the name of the script?
I did the test using a fork of Orchard core, and I did it on github.com/orchard-project/Orchard core, and the dev and the master on different Azure web app. So you have Orchard core doc and Orchard core docs with an S, .azurewebsites.net, pointing one to master and one to dev.
mkdocs, that's the name I was looking for. mkdocs is the script that will build a static site based on these MD files that we have in the repository.
And
okay.
I found an article explaining how to make it.
Yep. So now we can generate exactly what we need. So this we are using currently read the docs, but read the docs doesn't support this script completely correctly, so it fails with for some reasons and
No,
some bugs.
It doesn't support custom things.
Yeah, but it's supposed to work with mkdocs, but there are some bugs.
Yes.
So now, at least, we can run the script exactly like we want using the Python that is installed on Azure websites, and this way we will host the static website on an Azure website that we already have on Azure for all the sites we have. So
Yes.
that will be better. And we can have two sites if we want with the latest and dev and master with different URLs. That will work.
Yeah, supplements.
Probably need to rewrite that Orchard core modules documentation.
Orchard modules documentation. What are you talking about?
If you go back to MK docs, and it's the second link down that we've got, Orchard core modules.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's the main section. Oh no. Okay.
Yep, sure. Yep.
It's a little bit old.
Well, yeah, Orchard core modules. Yeah, at least we have the samples. We should at least point to the samples, which explains that. With yeah, that would be better actually.
I think I wrote this.
Probably because I didn't write it. So yeah, because you worked on the modules first, so you wrote that. And we need also a new entry called workflows, and some activities with what you can type inside and methods you have access to, but that will come. Good. Other questions?
Taxonomies?
No news. I don't know. I was working on that. Soon. I'm done with perf. I did all the things.
So we're moving away from ADO and...
No, we are not. Okay, good. Thanks everyone. See you on Thursday or Tuesday.